Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal, particular channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This, of course, is episode number 75, and for episode number 5 for this week, of course, goes to the second full-length album from, of course, Samson, led by the late Paul Samson, as of course is Head On, which was originally released in June of 1980, and of course is the follow-up to, of course, 1979's Survivors. Now, again, Head On, again, like I stated, was originally released in June of 1980, and that of course, was 2 months ago. Since there was never any day that it was released on, I couldn't have been able to do, let's say, a proper anniversary spotlight on this. I mean, at this point, it's already reached its 40th anniversary. But because of there was never any solid day that was released on, just the fact that it was released in June, in a way, kind of somewhat hindered a bit of me doing again a proper album of anniversary spotlight on this. But you know what? It doesn't really matter. The fact that I'm at least finally spotlighting this album is good enough. All right, so Head On. Again, this was the follow-up to 1979 Survivors, if I hadn't stated that already. And in many ways, which was it was a good album. Survivors was definitely a good album, but not a great album as well. It was just a fine record. That definitely, of course, had a bit of a different lineup there. I mean, Paul Samson was the vocalist, though, or handled at least a lot of the vocal duties for Survivors. But when it comes to a lot of the rhythm section, Thunderstick was definitely present there. Chris Almoner, of course, did some work on that album as well, but it was really mostly Gillan members John McCoy and Colin Towns that also definitely did plenty of the work on that one. John McCoy definitely having pretty much most of the bass parts on there, whereas Colin Towns had a lot of the keyboard parts. And in many ways, almost seemed like a collaboration with a lot of the members of, again, like Paul Samson, Thunderstick, and of course Gillan members John McCoy and Colin Towns, which of course later on, coming to this very album here, Head On, they definitely would record this album, and of course John McCoy's Kingsway Studio, or Kingsway Recordings, actually, it was named. And of course, John McCoy definitely had quite a bit in owning that building anyways, that whole studio. And of course, again, that was also the home for a lot of where Ian Gillan and a lot of these guys, again, of John McCoy and so on. Bernie Torme recorded a lot of those Gillan albums as well, but they, of course, definitely opened up that recording studio to, of course, Samson here. And that's where, again, we lead to this album here, which, again, also saw in many ways, the official debut for, of course, Bruce Dickinson, who, of course, is going by the name here, Bruce. I don't have to elaborate on the joke on there. I mean, Scott Waters and Trog already joked on the name Bruce anyways on their Hard and Heavy list videos from in the past. So I don't have to really elaborate on that. I mean, they definitely joked quite a bit about his name here. But anyways, again, this, of course, was the official debut for, of course, Bruce Dickinson. I don't have to elaborate on anything after this for Bruce Dickinson. I mean, everyone knows about what the stuff he would do, of course, with Iron Maiden. That, again, it's all history that was laid out in sand. It's already been cemented. I don't have to talk too much about that. only again just talk about Head On here. So here we go. We have Head On, the official debut for Bruce Dickinson and the second album for, of course, Paul Samson and co. So where do I really start with this album? Where do I start with Head On? Now, I'll definitely go on to some, since of course me owning the Bright Lights, the albums 1979 and 1981, I'll definitely elaborate on both versions for Head On, since with the release of that box set, we basically were given two versions of the album. I'll focus on the second version of the album a little later on in this video. So this Album of the Week Spotlight will be pretty long, though who knows if it will be as long as my Album of the Week Spotlight for albums such as Let There Be Rock and Back in Black. But we'll see. Anyways, so Head On, of course, as far as when it comes to its track listing, well, we have, of course, we're given about 10 songs for this one. I mean, opening up, of course, with, which was one of the lead singles for this album, being, of course, Hard Times, of course, Take It Like a Man, Vice Versa, which was also a single for this one. I mean, of course, these three songs, Hard Times, Take It Like a Man, and Vice Versa, were all, of course, were given music video treatments. I mean, they were released as the Biceps of Steel video, which, of course, was also released as a DVD years later, many decades later. It was released as a DVD. And that is a very cool watch. And it's also very cool to see Bruce Dickinson sporting a mustache. And also, even during these albums, also sporting a lot of chest hair. Also, even also wearing, again, even shorter hair almost at times. We much look like a very rugged Freddie Mercury. Very, very interesting. Still, though, again, these were given video treatments, and they are very, very interesting to watch, especially the ones for Vice Versa. It's just funny to see that female just cut our muscled guy Samson, cut his hair off and basically get mad, and that's, again, leading into, of course, the track where it's very, I mean, the production work for this one, I actually have to say, is very, very high quality, actually, compared to a lot of other bands. It was very... It seems low budget nowadays, but I think at that time, that was actually, I think, pretty high budget, actually. Very cool and very something. Definitely a very cool watch. But anyways, these were definitely given lead singles. I mean, the B-side to, of course, I believe it was for Hard Times. The B-side to Hard Times was actually a song called Angel with a Machine Gun, which, of course, was then given, was later made as a bonus track to a lot of the reissues for Head On. And that is a great fucking track too. Angel with a Machine Gun is a great fucking rocker too. That's definitely a great one to talk about. But there's other great songs off this one too. I mean, of course, I love the songs such as, again, like Take Like a Man and Vice Versa. And Vice Versa is very close to being ballad on this one. I mean, there's actually in many ways, there's about 3 ballads on this one, but they're very much straight up rockers in their own right. They just have a very cool feel to a lot of them. But the Vice Versa is definitely just one of the... It's a great fucking track. Definitely one of those that really definitely also showcased quite a bit of Bruce Dickinson's vocal talents as well. And definitely kind of showed a lot of the world what he would have been very much capable of. And really... and also really showed you why he became one of the reasons for Iron Maiden's success. Definitely, again, with things like Number of the Beast and those albums and Power Slave, it really showed you that he was going to be the Iron Maiden's key success, especially given his vocal talents on some of these songs as well. But I'll elaborate even more on that when I talk about the second version for this, for Head On here. But after that, we get, of course, other pretty cool songs I've come to really, really dig over the years. Again, like Man Watcher. Of course, one of my absolute favorite songs off this album is also the one that really kind of turned me on to Samson in the first place. As, of course, is none other than Too Close to Rock. My God, is this one of my absolute favorite songs. But this was the song that really made me that turned me on to Samson in the first place. And also just made me go like, fuck. That is Bruce Dickinson on vocals. Good. This is a fucking heavy rocker. Definitely in the vein of early UFO and Michael Schenker. I mean, Paul Samson on this. I mean, even on songs like, for example, like Take It Like a Man. and Man Watcher, and of course this song here, Take Too Close to Rock. He's very much has a very, very similar feel to Michael Schenker. I mean, this definitely feels like a UFO or a Michael Schenker group to style playing and so on and writing. This song, and every bit of this, and I mean, the lyrics, very British though, very British when it comes to lyrics, but goddamn does, again, both Paul Samson and Bruce Dickinson, do they fucking own this song. They own this fucking track from beginning to end. Bruce Dickinson and Paul Samson were a fucking great combination. Again, it is very, very much like, again, Michael Schenker and Phil Mogg or Gary Barden. It's just a great fucking combination from beginning to end. And this definitely really showcased a lot of that heavy, hard-hitting talent of these two guys. It's just very hard-hitting stuff with this track, and it's one of my absolute favorites. After that, this is where you then, of course, go into, let's say, like the second side for the album, which again would open up with a track called Thunderburst. Interesting thing when it comes to this is that this, of course, eventually was then taken by Iron Maiden, or especially Steve Harris himself, and of course was then the Ides of March on Killers. But hearing it being done by Paul Samson is really interesting. Again, it's gone by the name Thunderburst here. And again, it starts off very melancholic, very much with an acoustic piece, before then breaking into the iconic fucking guitar licks and riff in it that is so iconic, and that is with, of course, the Ides of March. It's just so interesting. It's very cool hearing this track being done again a year before, before Iron Maiden. But there is some interesting, again, when you look at actually look at the history behind this track, again, between Thunderburst and the Ides of March, it's really interesting. Apparently, again, the Ides of March did come first. It's just that it was actually, again, being worked on as early as 1978, but it seemed like since it's never been really elaborated on the early partnerships between Paul Samson and Steve Harris. It's never really elaborated on how these really began, because again, they said, when you look into the history behind this track, it's said that apparently it's being stated that Ides of March did come first, actually. But the thing is, it seemed, as far as when it comes to the recordings part of this history, Thunderburst in many ways came first as far as being recording wise. But still, it's never really elaborated on where the partnership and how it got passed off to who and where and so on. So really, it's really up to debate on what came first. But for those who probably were familiar with Samson at first, they would definitely say that Thunderburst came first, and then Ides of March came second. But for those who were then more familiar with Iron Maiden, it'd be very interesting for them to go back and then hear it on head on and be like, wow, it did Steve Harris rip off Samson, even though that is very absurd. But still, it also is what is very much noted, that when Steve Harris then took the Ides of March and put it on Killers and then gave himself full credit to the track, it's been said it really pissed off Paul Samson and especially Thunderstick, who once at one point was even Iron Maiden's original drummer, actually. And of course, Clive Burr also being one of the original drummers for Paul Samson. So again, those ties between Paul Samson and Iron Maiden really just come together. It just starts to be really pieced, it really does come pieced together and everything. It just comes full force with the history between Paul Samson and Iron Maiden. It's really interesting, but still, really, and nonetheless, it's very cool, and it's definitely a highlight for the sound for sure as well, Thunderburst. And it took me years to really really gravitate towards this version of this track. So again, being more familiar with the Ides of March off of Killers by Iron Maiden, but still, which version I prefer? You know what? It's really tough. I think I like both versions. I think Paul Samson really did very well. In many ways, he really handled a lot of the guitar playing for this one. I mean, Chris Salminer may not be, he may not be no Steve Harris, but he still worked pretty good on laying down the bass parts for this track. So I think that they definitely did very well. So it's very cool just hearing a primitive version of the Ides of March on this album here. Definitely cool. Still great. And after that, we then get, of course, other great rockers such as Hammerhead, which is a great speedy rocker, which again also might have one thinking of like Judas Priest for sure. Especially even when it comes to even for here like Hunted and another track here I'm also going to talk about, which is Take Me to Your Later, which usually it's actually, a lot of people seem to really rate this as a weak track on this album. I don't consider Take Me to Your Later as a weak song. I think this is also one of those, it took me years to really appreciate. But now, again, I'll elaborate more when I talk about the second version of it, which I'm close to. I am very close to talking about the second version for this album that was released, a part of the Bright Lights, the album's 1979-1981. But it very much has a lot of presets. I mean, Bruce Dickinson really adds, I think his most Halford-esque vocal performance is really on Take Me to You Later. And of course then Hammerhead is great. But of course also Hunted, which is also, again, the second ballad for this album, and it's a great ballad too. I also really dig this one. Again, this also has definitely a bit of a Priest feel to this one too. Very cool stuff. Just another very cool track. But again, Take Me to the Later is also some very early speed metal. This really is some early fucking speed metal, and definitely would also, you almost could see as being a influence a lot of those speed metal bands and early power metal bands in the mid to late 80s and stuff, again with like for example Halloween and so on, who probably took a lot of inspiration from this, even like Savage Grace as well. So it's a great fucking track. But the album ends, of course, with a song called Walking Out on You, which is definitely the third ballad on this one, but this is an epic track on here. This basically is like, 6 minutes and 45 seconds, and it's definitely one of the longest songs on this album. It just starts off, it's also very proggy as well with this track. It definitely has a progressive feel to this one. But I love the way that the way the song just builds, and it took me years again to really appreciate this. And I'll get to one of the reasons when I talk about the second version here, which is very, very, very short. It's very soon here, on why it kept me from really appreciating more and more of this album. But this is just the way this song just builds up from, again, a very, very suspenseful as well. And it's just so cool and moody. And then when it finally breaks into that track, fucking Bruce Dickinson, again, just owns this fucking song. He just owns this. And again, there's some great lead work as well from Paul Samson on this one. And Thunderstick has some very cool, almost jazzy-esque kind of drumming with some of this. Way, again, just building up and so on for, again, just that beginning a portion of this track. Good God, is this a fucking great way to end the album. Just a good song nonetheless that definitely ends the album that I feel at times is very underappreciated. And that's where I finally lead into the second version of this one, which would be titled the Tony Platt Alternative Mix, which finally saw the light of day last year as a part of the Bright Lights, the album's 1979 to 1981. Where the fuck do I even also start with this mix, other than the fact that one of the many reasons why it took me years to also appreciate most of Head On was its mixing. Had this been the mix that was used as the official mix for the album, I think a lot of people would have been a little more different on this one, and probably would have been a little more appreciative of this album. Because, my God, does Tony Platt really do a lot of changing to this album? Does he really do a lot of work on this one? And the thing is, he had mixed this right after, I think, before they had pressed it and before they even released it. he was really was planning on wanting this to be the main mix, but the thing is, they were about to release it, and it got shelved for years. The only thing from this mix that did see the light of day was Hard Times, which again was the basis for the 7-inch single, and of course I think even for the version, the mix version for the Biceps of Steel. And I think both these I think all three, I think for Hard Times, Take Like a Man and Vice Versa from this mix, where I think were all used as the song mixes for, of course, the Biceps of Steel video tracks for these songs. But my God, with what he did with this album, it's like listening to the album again. It's like, it just sounds so fresh. Every bit of the mix is just brought up front. Thunderstick's his drum snares and the whole the overall feel and just atmosphere just sounds so fucking good. It really lifts up a lot of these songs on here. Everything just sounds so, it just elevates, and the guitar tone is beefed up more. It just has a lot more bottom end to it as well, and even has a lot of high end as well to some of it. It's very good, just great bottom end to this version. And of course, Bruce Dickinson. There's even extra vocal layering on most of these songs. I mean, good God. I think I do prefer a lot of the Tony Platt mix for this album than I really do the original mix, because of it's just made me more realize that Head On is probably in many ways my favorite Samson album. I mean, I do love Shock Tactics after this one, but the Tony Platt mix just really kind of makes me realize that Head On might be, again, as one of the best albums with Bruce Dickinson on vocals with Samson. Just it's just a great fucking album, and it's again, just hearing the Tony Platt mix just made it made me come to that conclusion. I mean, even listen to, of course, again, Take Me to You Later off of the Tony Platt mix. This is why I've come to say I think it's a very much an underappreciated track, and that's because of the Tony Platt mix. It just has a lot, especially when it comes to a lot of the middle parts for this one. It just pops everything, from the guitars to everything. Everything is so up front. Everything just sounds more fuller. It just sounds amazing. This really should have been the official mix for the album. This should have been the official mix that should have been put and pressed on the vinyl back in 1980. This should have been. Because of when you listen again to the original mix, in many ways, it just sounds, it really does kind of sound unfinished. Whereas what Tony Platt did with this one, he really made it sound like a finished product. It's a great fucking mix, and everything is, again, it's just all brought up to the forefront and everything. And Bruce Dickinson just also, again, on this mix, you just really also even more hear on how much of a fucking vocalist he was at this time. I mean, his vocal range on these Samson albums were a lot more variety in many ways. They were very also, his vocal range was a lot more diverse on these Samson albums than compared to the albums he did with Iron Maiden, which again, I love those Iron Maiden albums with Bruce Dickinson on vocals. Definitely do not get me wrong, but his vocal performances on these Samson albums, especially again Head On and Shock Tactics, and of course the Live at Reading 1981, god damn did he have a fucking vocal range. He really wasn't just staying in that same very operative range that many people seem to really recognize him with. He really had a very cool vocal range. I mean, even that very gruff and gritty voice that he ended up having on albums like No Prayer for the Dying and Fear the Dark, he really definitely displayed on some of these early Samson albums, but in a way, he used it to its advantage and knew when to use it, especially on Shock Tactics, which eventually, by next year, I'll then get to as a album spotlight. But his vocal range on Head On is fantastic, and again, that's why I say the pairing between him and Paul Samson was just fantastic. It was a winning combination for sure. So really, if I have to really recommend this album, hopefully at this point all of you is still able to grab at least the box set for Bright Lights from Samson, because at this point it seems like that's the only way you're going to be able to at least get the Tony Platt mix of this album. Hopefully at some point they'll might release that mix on record, on vinyl. And finally will probably release on vinyl. It'd be cool if Dissonance would get some, work out some deal to put the Tony Platt mix on vinyl and make that be, again, for the first time. Because that is the preferred mix for this album. That is the actual preferred mix. It's a fucking great mix and it just sounds so fantastic. And it really definitely it breathes just new life into the album Head On. It's fantastic. So again, it's a great fucking album. Definitely for me, it is my favorite Samson album for sure. And also again, definitely shows is also one of Bruce Dickinson's best vocal performance as well on record. So with that, again, for all of those who of course had lived with this album, definitely let me know what were your thoughts of this album when it first came out. If you were there when it first came out. But for those who have at least heard it, definitely let me know what were your thoughts anyways of this album. But for those who have yet to listen to this, again, I'm going to make it fucking clear. It's still very affordable. If you want to hear this album in the best possible form, go and grab the Bright Lights, the albums 1979 to 1981, and check out the Tony Platt mix for this album before you even check out the original mix. Or even, again, do a very cool one and go from the original mix and then listen to it, because then you really get the experience is even more heightened. Just a great fucking mix, and it's a great album. But again, for those who want to, I definitely, hands down, I prefer the Tony Platt mix of Head On. So with that, I hope you all enjoyed. This is Every Thrash I say I'm out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.